We are lost and we are longing, wandering in the wilderness, searching for your holy presence and the reason we exist. Praise to you, O great Creator, Maker of the land and sky. Praise to you, O living water, hope and breath of every life. Hear the cries of all creation, how the tears like rivers flow, for your touch of grace and healing, and the love that leads us home. Praise to you, O great Creator, Maker of the land and sky. Praise to you, O living water, hope and breath of every night. May we see your way. May we live your way of justice. May we walk your way of peace. See, may we see your sacred vision. May we know your sweet release. Praise to you, O great Creator, Maker of the land and sky. Praise to you, O living water, hope and breath of every life. As the person comes forward to introduce, can you just sing with your hands once?
You are so beautiful. You are so beautiful. I just want to mention, sometimes after people have done things with us at the seminary, they say, oh, I'd like to do more. And we like that. And so I just want to mention, we have degree programs, we have workshops, we have centers, and we also have a marvelous STEAM-In program. And after lunch, or at lunch, at 12:15, Jean Trumbauer and Glenn Harrington Hall are going to be in the Campbell room. They're going to be in the room that it says on your schedule, the Campbell room, and they're going to talk about the DMIN program. So whether that's something that fits for you now or that you might think about in the future, I just wanted you to be aware of that. So now, wearing all of his hats and all of his glory, our speaker, our dean, and the person who's going to do the introductions, Richard Weiss.
It's a very simple hat this time, which is that it is my great honor to introduce to you again this year's Picard lecturer for the second of her 2 lectures. I know some of you were here yesterday and heard Steve's introduction, so bear with me, there's some repetition, but it's not the same. Winona LaDuke, an enrolled member of the Mississippi Band Anishinaabe, received her BA in Rural Economic Development from Harvard University and her MA in Community Economic Development from Antioch University. She is well known as an activist, environmentalist, economist, and author. She has written a novel, Last Standing Woman, and 2 nonfiction works, All Our Relations, Native Struggles for Land and Life, and Recovering the Sacred, The Power of Naming and Claiming. She has been a high school principal and twice a candidate for Vice President of the United States for the Green Party. So she is not easily discouraged or dismayed. She was named Woman of the Year by Ms. Magazine in 1986. She has received the Thomas Merton Award, the BIHA Community Service Award, the Anne Bancroft Award for Women's Leadership, and the Reebok Human Rights Award. She is a founder of the Indigenous Women's Network. She currently leads 2 critically important environmental and cultural projects whose character tells you much about what she brings to these lectures. These are the White Earth Land Recovery Project, of which she is the founding director, and Honor the Earth, an organization she co-founded and for which she is executive director. The purpose of the White Earth Land Recovery Project is to facilitate recovery of the original land base of the White Earth Indian Reservation, while preserving and restoring traditional practices of sound land stewardship, language fluency, community development, and strengthening of our spiritual and cultural heritage. As part of that mission, it works to continue, revive, and protect our native seeds, heritage crops, naturally grown fruits, animals, wild plants, traditions, and knowledge of our indigenous and land-based communities. The work of Honor the Earth, the only Native organization that provides both financial support and organizing support to Native environmental initiatives, is grounded in the belief that a sustainable world is predicated on transforming economic, social, and political relationships that have been based on systems of conquest toward systems based on just relationships with each other and with the natural world. As their mission states, Honor the Earth is committed to restoring a paradigm that recognizes our collective humanity and our joint dependence on the earth. Please join me in welcoming back to this podium Winona LaDuke to address us on durable and respectable economics.
So I was trying to do a PowerPoint for you guys today, because I have all this geeky economic stuff, but you have to imagine, okay? Good morning. How are you guys all doing? Good. Oh, that's very good. Thank you. Fabulous. Fabulous. Since I last saw you, I had a round of tennis with my sister. It was a nice day yesterday, huh? Did you know that in my alter ego, I am Serena Williams? Did you know that? She's Venus. She's kind of more the love goddess. I'm like the let's just kick their butt. I believe that one should, you have a right to be someone else in your mind, right? Yeah, that's good. I'm on that. Okay, so, wait. Must find a couple of these. Anin, that's how we say hello. I think you know that. Anin Nindawe Maganaduk. Hello, my relatives. Thank you again for the opportunity to visit with you. I'm going to refresh a bit. Most of you were here yesterday, right? Who was not here yesterday? Oh. I'll speak slowly. Yesterday I talked a little bit about indigenous economic thinking, or sustainability thinking. So I will start by reiterating that. In our teachings we say that Gichi Debwewin, which would be the phrase, Gichi Debwewin, or the great law, the Creator's law is the highest law, higher than the laws made by nations, states, or municipalities. One would do well to live in accordance with the Creator's law. What are some of the teachings about the Creator's law? One is that most things which are natural are cyclical. the moons, the tides, hydrological cycles, all cyclical systems, and this is the month of, this is Wabagonageesis, which is the May moon, but it is the flower moon. And in most indigenous traditions, you have moons that are named after what occurs on land, not what occurred in history, as in the Roman emperors, right? Which I think is a significant demarcation of consciousness and is worth reflecting on. We know that in Dinaway-Muganatuk, we are all related. That is an indigenous concept of what is natural law, but is also an economic concept. That is to say that in our worldviews, and when I say our, I always have to have a disclaimer, which is I do not know all things about all indigenous peoples, particularly since there's about 700 different indigenous nations in North America, right? That's just like a little spectrum. Great cultural diversity, biological diversity. I believe that there's a relationship between cultural and biological diversity, and both should be sustained. Because that is not only a beautiful thing, but that is a healthy world. We know that a biological diversity is good. We know that a monocrop, the Irish potato famine taught us, is not a good idea. And I think that we could also make the argument that a cultural monocrop is a bad idea. In that, though, we find that there are some underlying teachings. And one of those, in Dinaway-Muganatuk, that we are all related, whether we have wings or fins, or hooves or roots, or hands. Another teaching is that in our Anishinaabe language and in most other languages I do not know much, but I do know that most, and I talked about in the Maori language, Moai, the idea of the inherent and life force within all beings. And some of those beings, like in our Anishinaabe teachings, the word asin, the word for stone, is an animate noun. Yeah. Meaning that things that might be considered inanimate in this society are not considered inanimate by all. And that what it determines their value and stature as animate or inanimate, right, is in fact it's subjective. In a worldview, it is not a given, which is, I think, worth considering in itself. Yeah? And then there is the teaching of in each, and within that also an affirming relationship that would come to the concept of reciprocity, which I talked about, the idea that you take only what you need and you leave the rest. And when you take something, you are very thoughtful in what you harvest and how you harvest. And yesterday we talked about the idea of mushrooms or medicinal plants, which people understood. You can't take them all or you're not good. Next round. And then the teaching of, in each deliberation, which is best articulated by the Iroquois, in each deliberation we consider the impact upon the 7th generation from now. Yeah? Those are teachings that are entrenched or embedded in most indigenous knowledge systems, and I believe are essential tenets of sustainability. Eduardo Galeano, a great Latin American scholar, once said, in the colonial to neo-colonial alchemy, gold changes to scrap metal and food to poison. We have become painfully aware of the mortality of wealth, which nature bestows and imperialism appropriates. That is the nature of empire. That in the colonial to neo-colonial alchemy, as technologies change, as the perception of entitlement changes, gold changes to scrap metal and food to poison, there is always something new to extract. And that which is held within the land or held within communities that may live on the land, whether those communities have hands or roots or paws, is appropriated by others. The idea of biocolonialism would be an example of that, where even today the patenting of life forms and the extracting of life forms and genetic engineering is this appropriation. I talked yesterday briefly about the contrast between that and linear economic systems, and those which we exist in, that exist today. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those later, but essentially the argument that I made, as you recall, was that a system which is based on a linear economic system indicated by two, I gave you an example of a physical system of waste production and the human production of waste being the social production of waste being prisons. Neither of those is durable or sustainable. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about them. So there's your Cliff's Notes to yesterday. Okay. Now within that, having discussed that briefly, and I don't know if I forget that I'm an economist actually by training, but it does, and it was funny when I was back at Harvard and I was, I'm not a Keynesian economist, as you see. That is not me, but I know I am, but I forget that because I've spent most of my time doing whatever it is I do and I had not reflected on it. But there is a great deal of enlightened thinking, thankfully, in this arena these days that 20 years ago perhaps was not so loudly voiced. And sometimes if you are a guy with a PhD, you can say these things, and they are more accepted. So a couple of my favorites, there's about four. I was talking to my friend Marion this morning about some of my intellectual heroes, of course. Amory Lovins. And he has the great charts. Paul Hawken, Herman Daly, and who's the last one? I'll come up with them in a minute. But anyway, their discussions are widely under the terminology of ecological economics, which have a good deal of resonance with indigenous economic thinking, and maybe an interpretation, And in general, what I'm going to talk about is some of those in terms of efficiencies, negatechnologies, policies, looking at the questions of restructuring, subsidies, biomimicry, and the questions of, for instance, fair trade versus free trade. And these are widely discussed, even by Thomas Friedman, and many others as things that we need to consider as we reframe from thinking within empire to thinking post-empire, in which you are all in a position to discuss. So, some of the myths that need to be busted, which I'm sure you are aware of, are the myths of the invisible hand of Adam Smith. Unless the invisible hand has Exxon written on it, I'm pretty sure that there's no such thing as an invisible hand. The reality is in this economy, the US highly inefficient energy economy, we're basically a bunch of addicts. We feel entitled. And the problem with being an addict or a junkie is that you do a lot of bad stuff and hang out with dealers. And that's America. That's America's energy policy, and that's who influences a good portion of policies in this country, arguably. And we could banter back and forth, but you let me know if you're not a junkie. But one of the things in dealing with addictions is acknowledging. Amen. And then beginning, but that is a step that we haven't taken. Because, I'll talk a little bit about it more. Well, in the second is the idea of, within this mythology, are arguments like the economics of scale, the economies of scale. The economies of scale make sense if you have unlimited access to petroleum, because you can produce it in California and you can ship it if you don't have to pay either the diseconomies or the true price of oil. The economies of scale make sense with the access to massive power lines and not counting actually the inefficiencies of the power lines in themselves. So the economies of scale argument holds up in a very limited bubble. But to the extent that any of us have any understanding whatsoever of the difference between a factory farmed animal, which one could say is more efficiently produced, and an animal that comes from a local farm, there are a number of of qualitative as well as economic issues that are associated. It is the third myth that needs to be busted, and I know I had to bust it here about 2 months ago. I was at a hearing with Al Franken on energy policy, and it was an interesting moment, which you can imagine, which is that it was at Morris, University of Minnesota Morris, which is probably the most enlightened campus in terms of its sustainability. It has 2 wind turbines, and they're rocking, you know, and so they had a forum, and they had asked me to come down, and my organization, both White Earth Land Recovery Project and Honor the Earth are developing a relationship with the University of Minnesota Morris because it's close. They're interested in sustainability, and they have a free education for Native program, tuition waiver. And so they have a huge number of Native students there. And a lot of them are from my reservation. So I feel that it is an excellent opportunity to build leadership. Yeah. So I get invited to this hearing, and it is on energy economies and the renewable energy economy. And I walk in. We will go with 10 minutes late, 15 minutes late. You've noticed my style. It was icy roads. I was driving from the north. You don't want to hear. I cruise in, and the room is full. And there are 6 seats at the front. One is occupied by Al Franken. The other are occupied by 5 other white men. And then there's me. And I walk into the room and I say, "Hi, guys." Because it is, renewable energy is one of the most racially and gender stratified economies that exists. And I, as many other people, have faced, this all my life. I'm familiar with this appearance, but it is always interesting being a woman of color that walks into such a room, and they are largely unfamiliar with me, although Al did know who I was. But this, question of, and that is where, it is interesting that I actually just wrote an op-ed on the Donald Trump questioning of Obama. And then the second part of asking for his Harvard transcripts. Because the multitude of, I don't know if you've heard this, right? But the multitude of times that I have been asked if I actually went to Harvard and how I got in, and I actually spent a year at MIT as well. So it's like, huh. So you walk into a room of all these guys, and you're like, "Hi," and they're looking at you like, "Are you the token who is here to talk about the needs of Indians?" But this guy was saying, the unenlightened presenter, I would say, was making the argument to Mr. Franken, to Senator Franken, that rural economies, to boost the rural economy of northwestern Minnesota, we needed to consume more energy rather than less. And you have hung out with me since yesterday, and so you know that was not well received in my thinking. Because the idea that we have this assumption that quality of life and the robust nature of an economy is based on level of consumption is a myth that needs to be busted. Because no matter how much you shop, it doesn't fix things. But we have an economy that's 70% based on consumption. And so when George W. said, after 9/11, go shop, right? Do you remember that? So that whole suggestion that the more we consume, the better we will be, is part of what we need to disconnect. Because the reality is that quality of life is not related to level of consumption and level of income. And all of you know as well as I do is that we have far too many strip malls, right? And not enough community gardens or whatever. It is. But that was the discussion that was held, and it was 2 months ago. So, having said, there are many more myths that could be debunked, but I think that economically it is essential. Just because, it's just like Donald Trump. Just because you keep saying the guy wasn't born in the U.S. doesn't mean it's true, right? And we've all been raised in a country that keeps saying these things, but that does not mean that they are true. And so the question is, it is incumbent upon us to kind of deconstruct mythology that is pernicious. So having said that, there are some things that are on the horizon that it is essential that we are aware of. And you are schooled in these. But the issues that I'm going to talk about, and then I'm just going to talk about my community a bit. One, climate change, right? Unless you are in deep denial, as are some who are, conveniently placed in, turns out it's happening. And the projection is not only, that we don't know what's going to happen, it's what we do know. Things are not going to go well, right? It's going to get more tough, right? More storms. Projections are economically that 20% of world GDP will be expended on climate change-related disasters by 2020, right? And I don't know in whose stock portfolio that is, right? You know what I'm saying? It's like, who is on that one? Who is paying the price tag for the moving of the Arctic villages like Shishmarov and Kivalina that are falling into the ocean right now, or the islands that are going under, right? So, climate change has huge ecological, social, health, and economic implications that are not considered. When I talked to even my tribal council about this a few years ago, talking to a tribal council is not unlike talking to a politician. They're pretty much the look was, that's not happening while I'm in office, right? That's what's going on, right? Which is that lack of, as I was discussing yesterday, the idea of condoling a chief for long-term responsibility. It was pretty much, you elected me for 2 years or 4 years, and, while I'm here, we're going to do good, but no, right? Right, I don't want to be that one. Second issue, which you are also familiar with, is that of peak oil, which means we consumed, half the world's known oil resources a few years ago. There's plenty out there, but, it's in places that we should not get it. The bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, in the Arctic, polar ice caps, There is plenty of oil in a few countries that may not want to give us their oil. Can only afford one $100 billion a year war. Cannot afford second. Just math of war, right? And the oil that is coming in, as you know, 80% of the oil in Minnesota is coming from the tar sands. Dirtiest oil on the planet, and it's feeding our addictions. And somehow that's perceived as kind of a domestic oil, secure. Canada is not actually state, And the pipelines that they are trying to put through, I spent a lot of time fighting the pipelines, and I'm fighting this thing called the heavy haul, which if I could have shown my slide, there's this fabulous picture. I'm standing in front of this truck. The trucks are carrying 330,000 pounds. They can't go on a highway there, so they're trying to run them down this road, Highway 12, the same road that's out here. But in the very west coast, Highway 12 goes through the middle of the Nez Perce Reservation. And it's a scenic road like this. And it got stuck. The first one. And then the second one took out, the power for 3 cities, or 3 small towns. Because the loads are not suited for, and that's for the equipment for the tar sands. So what we're trying to do is a bad thing, and to make it worse. And because, the Arctic is far away. Doesn't mean that we have right to destroy it.
That's right.
We also have peak minerals, which is what you're seeing with both the Pinocchis, right? It's going to affect Madeline Island, the Pinocchis, which is in Wisconsin, and of course the Polymet mine. Polymet, is that what it's called? The boundary waters.
Yes.
Which is causing the state legislature, and I don't know how far it got, we testified against it when there was a meeting, but I don't know if you know, but they of course are gutting the water quality standards in Minnesota.
Yes.
Yeah. And the latest round is wild rice is what holds the standard at 10 parts per million sulfide, and they're trying to increase that to 50.
Oh,
there is no wild rice that grows. The original proposal was 250 parts per million.
Oh my God. You
already got a dead zone on the St. Louis River for mining, but they're trying to gut the standard in Minnesota so that they can open up that mine, which has a rating that's been the lowest rating ever given by the EPA. I'm afraid to think it's called Water Legacy's website, but that's in the legislature right now. And it may require a veto in the government. And so it's the bottom of the barrel of oil and it's the bottom of the barrel of news, is this discussion. Not that I'm in support of mining anywhere, but what I am saying is that the mining that they're trying to reopen is more unconscionable.
Yes.
And it's like the exemptions that came out with for fracking. I don't know if you follow fracking.
Oh, unbelievable.
Right? So, which is for natural gas. Fracking. It's a movie called Gaslight. All right. The third issue is food security. Two separate issues occur when, you could look at this in a number of ways. But one is the relationship between petroleum and food access. In a country that the average meal travels 1,540 miles from farmer to table, the price of fuel affects the price of food. And that, for all of your constituencies, is going to become increasing a hardship. That is also related to the fact that they're saying that there's different figures, but I heard a conservative figure is there's 15 calories of fossil fuels to produce 1 calorie of food. What is slathered on it, what industrial agriculture does, right? And the transportation. I don't know if they're trying to package it. But you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so that's part of this other discussion about the economies of scale, which needs to be debunked and illustrates the problem in the relationship between the economies of scale argument and peak oil, which is unsustainable. Yeah. The second is, of course, in terms of food security, the second issue which you're all familiar with is the issue of the Monsanto problem. The packaging of foods and the concentration of the food industry in the hands of increasingly smaller numbers of corporate producers. And then legal ownership of seeds, right?
Yeah.
Which is a worldwide issue. And then, as well, we can go into the land grabbing, the fact that Korea owns more farmland outside of Korea in Africa. I'm not sure where the African people are supposed to come grow their food if China and Korea buy up all their farmland. Or they're producing flowers for, it's an endless set of issues on food security. But interestingly enough, when we won the Slow Food Award, I was at Slow Food in Torino, and I think it was in 2004. Yeah. And I was one of the final speakers in their closing plenary session, and I got done speaking it. And I looked, and I knew that something big was happening, and His Royal Highness, Prince Charles, came to speak, right? And as you've gathered, I'm not a big fan of British Empire. Even here. No. But that guy's pretty radical. He doesn't get a lot of credit for his radical thinking. He's an organic farmer, and all that land that he stole from everybody else, he's farming well. Yeah, and he was giving this speech. It was quite funny. He said, and I was this close to him. I bet you all want to touch me now, huh? I was that close to Charles. Anyway, he said the next billion people going to be born in the world are going to be born in slums on the edge of Calcutta, on the edge of Rio. And they're born in war-torn countries full of landmines. And corporations own all their land and all their seeds. And who's going to feed those chickens when they come home to roost? That guy said, that guy is radical. And I said, well, the thing is, he can say whatever he wants. He's not going to, no one's going to take his job. He's good. He's quite good. I was like, look at that. And so, it's always a lesson that in spite of the fact that I'm a critic of empire, I'm a fan of Prince Charles. So, in that setting, So, food security. Then lastly, it is an issue that needs, broader discussion, and I'm not going to now, but the fact is they aren't making any new water, right? What we got is what we got. The movement of our water, from this area to elsewhere. Fargo has no plan. I don't know if you've noticed this. Fargo is moving And their plan was actually to take water from the Buffalo aquifer. It's like just crazy. I was like, get a plan. You know what I'm saying? And on a worldwide scale, this issue of access to water and our level of destruction of clean water was huge. So those are issues that you are familiar with. Let me talk a little bit about our work on White Earth in the solution. Because I believe, as you have gathered from both my experience and my rambles and my resume, that that activism or making change happens at many levels. And I happen to largely work in my own community. And I like it. I like working there. And I've been at it for 30 years. And you all know that it takes time to make change. And so sometimes people are like, what are you up to now? And I'm like, pretty much the same thing. Pretty much, yeah, But I'm okay. But as Wes Jackson says, if you're working on something that you plan on finishing in your lifetime, you're not thinking big enough. Right? So I'm at it, we're at it, we're doing good. So our organization, the White Earth Land Recovery Project, is kind of a microcosm of the work that I do nationally in Indian country. And I think that, Joy knows from my, nationally is that the reason I have some credibility in doing the work is I actually do it in my community. I don't talk about the theory, I'm more about the practice, right? And everybody's community is different. But our organization emerged from the land rights struggle, and most of you, I can tell, are old enough to remember the Wadena administration that all went to jail in the 1990s. We tried to get, our land was taken. We had the misfortune of having Frederick Weyerhaeuser as a neighbor, Little Falls, and he ended up with the trees and we ended up with the stumps, and that's how Minneapolis got built. Northwestern Minnesota led the country in logging, and all those fine houses are wood from White Earth. There's a relationship between poverty and wealth, and I see it every time I come here. And in that, our people were largely forced into the cities. The largest urban Indian population is from White Earth. We're refugees. By the 1920s, most of our people lived off reservation. And so we're one of the earliest refugee populations of Native people, aside from the indigenous people of Oklahoma, or the people who were moved to Oklahoma, right? And in that, our people have been born into, vast poverty. But it's structural. That's one of the reasons I'm an economist, is I could have spent all my time, trying to sue or something, or social services, but my interest is in how you change the structural elements of poverty, right? And so in that, our land rights struggle, did not emerge. It's been continuous since our treaty of 1867. And still to this day, you see, and you most recently have seen our work to secure and ensure our extraterritorial treaty rights to harvest outside of our reservation, right? Fishing, you saw last year, and I'm a continuous off-reservation ricer, because it turns out the rice ripens earlier, right? Down by Fergus Falls or over there by Hackensack, right? Earlier than on my reservation, so that's where I'm gonna go, because that's what we always did. So our organization was formed in 1989 out of exhausting our legal recourse and going all the way through the courts, and our tribe got back 10,000 acres of land, and we still don't control the majority of land within our reservation. I'd have to do some reassessment because we have private, but about 10% is held by the tribe. Maybe another 10% is held by Indians in fee, like myself. I'm a fee holder, just like you, just, holding land as other people, right? It's my people, private property. But then the question is that if you have a territory, it's not unlike the questions of whether it is Palestine or any place else with absentee land ownership. In order to secure your long-term resilience as a community, you must recover your land base. So our organization works on recovery of land. We only have a small scrap. We have 1,400 acres we've purchased. And people say, when are you getting more? And we might get some more, but right now I'm just really busy on what I got. And on that land, we grow, we have a large maple syruping operation. We just, closed up. I was talking about that yesterday. The kvetching of one of my staff members about how hard it was. And we got a lot of syrup. I was like, go. Anyway, we grow organic food. Let me put it this way. In 2003, The Callaway Elementary School won the No Child Left Behind Award. 2004, they put $1.5 million in renovations into the school. 2005, they closed the school for financial reasons, right? And in 2006, they sold us the school for $250,000. But buying the school in Minnesota, if you're a Native person, is tricky. Just a quote from the Detroit Lake School Board or Beckett County School Board was, we don't know what's going to happen if we sell that school to those Indians. That was her quote, school board chair. And I said, I was kind of like, grow up. Wait, let me get this right. You guys stole all this land and now we buy it back and you're mad. I mean, that's what's going on. You know what I'm saying is so in that school that they were so worried about, I'm banned from ever running a school there because, of course, that would be wrong, to run a school for Indians there. But anyway, I don't do that. We have a USDA certified food production facility so that we can grow food and process food from local farmers for the schools on the reservation. We have a farm to school program, right? We have at one school, we're going to 3 schools next year. We have and we also sell, we're called Native Harvest. And I was trying to bring down our stuff, but I was on the fly, as you gathered, coming here. So we're called Native Harvest. You can order from us on the internet or at the Seward. I think the Seward and the Wedge carry us. And then we have daycare in there. We have a couple of other nonprofit organizations because there's no civil society structure on White Earth, if you understand what I'm saying. And I believe in civil society. And then we have, we're putting up a radio station because we got an FCC license for a public radio station. And that's what we're doing. And then I have a wind turbine, which is what I'm going to talk about. So we buy back land, and on that land we do things. And in addressing these issues of food security and energy security, we studied, because that's what economists do and people who want to get federal grants do. We studied both the food and energy economy. And in looking at the food and energy economy on my reservation, we found that we spend $8 million a year on food. And of that $8 million, we surveyed 200 households, 10% of the households. $8 million, we spend $7 million off reservation, like that, at Walmart. And our tribal programs go to Food Service of America, or Cisco, right? So you got an $8 million economy of which 7/8 of it or whatever is outsourced, right? The $1 million that is spent on reservation is spent largely at convenience stores buying junk food, right? Adding to our second problem associated with this, which is the fact that we have 1/3 of the population with diabetes, right? And, there's not enough insulin to solve this one. But the reality is that local, or in our case, particularly indigenous foods that are from our area are much better for you and are the answer rather than processed foods for diabetes, our traditional foods, re-traditionalizing a diet. And there's some excellent work going on in the cities. Dream of Wild Health is one of the organizations down here that is doing this. So that's the economics of our food economy. And that's a snapshot of many communities. It's not just ours, an outsourced economy. Our second economic analysis was our energy economy. And we spend basically 1/4 of our money on energy on my reservation because we don't have any dinosaurs. So from heating, to electricity, it's all outsourced, right? And that economy, 1/4, the US spends 1/5. But because we're more remote, nobody has a Prius, there's higher rates, and we have less efficient homes, right? And so we suffer from fuel poverty, as does a good portion of Minnesota. So those two facets of our economy represent 50% of our economy. And in that, one might consider the general methodology used by rural planners and states and politicians and whoever is to say, let's get more jobs. But what our analysis says, which I think is more salient analysis, is that you got a leak. It represents 50% of your economy. You might want to quit leaking, right? So that's our work, is to figure out how to stop the leak. And that is not, I work particularly in reservations, but that formula, and that analysis is broadly applied to pretty much anywhere in America, particularly rural communities. I'm not an urban planner, but these sets of questions. So the questions and discussions that you all have on relocalizing food and energy economies, that's the economics of it. And so that's our strategy. So our plans are this. In terms of food, we're kind of bottom up. And Jackie gave me some excellent, I was kind of praying for starts, but she showed up with starts today, thank you. We are interested in this question of how not only we produce the food, but how everybody produces more of their own food. And so generally people laugh at me because I talk about yanking up your lawn, right? And putting in some grow boxes, community gardens. Economically, it makes great sense. Like a 10 by 20 garden will give you about $750 worth of food. But not all things can be measured that count. In other words, what's the value of that tomato your grandkid picks, right? Give me a price tag on that. Probably isn't, right? And also that relationship you rebuild by growing things, right? So we're interested in that, but which requires the same thing it requires with probably a lot of people kind of the deconstructing of the mythology that I can't grow. I got a brown thumb, right? Other people grow for me, like Whole Foods or somebody, right? And this whole question of, reconnecting and becoming people who grow food, not just people who buy food, is essential gift of being human. This interdependence yesterday, of the farm and the teachings of a farm is essential. So that is part of our work, is getting folks to grow, coaching them. I'm trying to get a grant to have like a Indigenous Ag Extension agent, because USDA is not responsive. Well, you know what I'm saying. They're like big farm, buy big combine. That's not us. Then it is what you grow. And I didn't bring here, but someone bought my book yesterday that essentially it turns out that Arikara squash, Potawatomi lima beans, and our hominy corn, which is what I'm trying to grow out extensively, are higher in amino acids, antioxidants, lower in calories, higher in protein, D vitamins than anything you can buy at the store. Heritage varieties, pre-hybrid. And I don't know how that happened. I think there's two things that happened. One, the breeding of industrialized foods. They were bred for durability, their long transport, uniformity, beauty, responsiveness to pesticides, right? And somehow they lost nutrition. And then the second thing is that I think the depletion of soil. And I don't, I'm not the person to understand that. I just know that's not what you want, right? So that has this beautiful, holistic health approach in terms of our diabetes, the restoration of those foods. So in that, it's a challenge, though, because you end up against, you got isolated fields of these corn varieties. I've been working for 4 years, 5 years. Well, actually, I've been working for about 15 years on the corn. And we're trying to grow out viable quantities of them. I'm on about six varieties. Like not every, 8,000 varieties of corn from the Americas. Not bad on agrobiodiversity, right? And in that agrobiodiversity, the Ojibways are the northernmost corn producers in the world. We push corn 100 miles north of Winnipeg. So I'm growing this Manitoba Flint that I'm trying to figure out. I'm looking at the provenance, and I'm doing actually a book on the stories associated with these. And I'm not going to go into all those now, but the reality is that what we grow, this Manitoba Flint, I'm working on growing it out to a viable level. Viable, in other words, if you had hundreds of acres of garden on your reservation previously to feed your people, where are those now? And how do you have enough corn so that it's not just something you buy at a boutique farmer's market, right? That's what we're after. So, Bear Island Flint. You know where Bear Island is? It's in the middle of Leech Lake Reservation. Microclimate. Anthropologists are actually a seed breeder. Gave me a handful of it. I got fields now. Turns out to be the most resilient corn in the north. And it grows about this tall. It's got big ears, multicolored. It's a corn that you use for hominy. which is, you know what hominy is? So a soup corn. And I'm going to get its nutritional value tested. I think it's probably pretty high. But what I like about it, doesn't require irrigation, doesn't really require fertilizer, although I'm using the fish guts from Red Lake Fisheries this year. Do you know what I'm talking about? They have this massive fisheries, and it turns out 2/3 of the fish is not a fillet. So I'm working on creating, you know, my long-term vision and kind of the West Jackson tradition is to get all those fish guts back into our ground. Does that make sense? It's kind of a long, and Red Lake was like, how much guts do you want, Winona? I was like, and the ER, as I was talking about yesterday, was like, and I have to go get the guts, right? And I said, that is right. It's like, oh. But they were all frozen in boxes because they're selling them to a mink farmer right now. And I just think that's a totally waste of fish guts. You know what I'm saying? So I'm like on this mission. But Red Lake likes it very much. They like a fish. They like this. So I got 2,500 pounds of them last week, and now they're 2,500 pounds, and they're like, it's funny. The whining goes on. The whining is going on, but we'll see. We'll see. You know what I'm saying? Give me 4 months. We'll see what those fish guts did. You know, with a little prayer and a little fish guts. I'm optimistic. But anyway, fertilizer, frost resistant, drought resistant, and when big sear winds came through, Monsanto's Roundup Ready tipped over, but my corn did not. Right? So I'm telling you this story because I believe that this is the kind of corn you want to grow in climate change. And so I pass that on to you. You know, seed savers, we just had a giant conference, a gathering, Great Lakes Indigenous Farming Conference, and I invite seed savers guy could come up. And we're talking about creating a Northern Indigenous seed library, which is what I think you should, you know, and just this whole idea of how you, because, you know, I hang out with the cool people around the world because I'm a big combuster myself, and I go down there and I was like, you know, you don't want to hear about someone who has a 130-day growing season. I don't want to hear about their varieties. It's not happening. You know, I want to hear about varieties that will grow here, right? And that are going to be able to hang. So that's what we're after. And it's a learning process. And so we're growing these varieties out for our community and largely for our ceremonies. That's what I fed for the Bear Feast. You know, and then we're trying to get them in the schools. And then we're trying to actually build them out so that we can eat them and then we can sell the surplus, you know. I mean, my community, what we have in terms of an exchange economy or a sale, you know, a surplus on, is two things right now. Aside from smart people, we have wild rice, millions of pounds of rice, and we have wind. We have class 4 wind. And so, but I think we could also be corn producers, you know, in small scale. And we do actually sell some now, but I'm working on that. So the relocalizing of a food economy to cut the leak and then to create a small export economy out of it that is fair trade and durable, right? The energy economy is similarly thought out, you know, going through efficiencies in households, right? To solar heating panels on the south side of your house. Very good idea, you know, because we have a lot of sun in the winter, although it is cold as heck. You can reduce about 25%. You know, in the of your heating bill, and the conversation I had with the tribal council was like, the fuel assistance ferry will probably not be here forever. You know, one might want to figure out how to, instead of, you know what I'm saying? And relocalizing from a petroleum-based propane economy to a wood economy, you know, with highly efficient wood stoves. For the purpose, you know, and I don't have a full analysis, but a wood economy in northern Minnesota is a local economy. Because it's local, you know. And the other thing is that a lot of you do counseling. I find that I do not need a counselor because I have a wood pile. I have a wood pile. I don't know if you've noticed this. Yeah, have you ever noticed the relationship between frustration, anxiety, and a wood pile? You know, it's like, bring it on. You know? So, you know, but I think it's this holistic thing too, because I think that making, you know, it is, you know, so that is our strategy. And then I have this wind turbine. We put up one, I'm moving to my second, which is a little bit the bane of my existence right now. I left here yesterday, and aside from the tennis game, I was quarreling with my wind engineer. But I am interested in this question of scale, which you probably gathered. The wind industry in this country and in Minnesota is divided into two categories. One is micro or small for the household, and the second is very large, mega. And the problem with this is, those are both important. My interest is in medium, which doesn't exist. It only exists in Denmark, it turns out, because we're very behind, far behind. And so guys named Sven and Lars and Anders talk to me. Right? Talk about, it's literally gender, and it's also just geographic isolation of technology. And so appropriately scaled technology is essential in energy. So I import this wind turbine from Denmark called a lowland. It's from this island called Lowland. Are any of you Danish? Yeah. So this island is produces 3 times more energy than they can use. And they're all a bunch of blacksmiths who make wind turbines. And the thing about them that I like, one of my goals is to go to Lowland. They actually came to see me. They said, we heard you have one of our turbines, can we talk about it? And I was like, yeah. I said, come visit me soon to, because I'm not an engineer, but anyway, the thing about it is that they built something that they could fix, that you didn't have to import somebody from someplace else to fix, which is the key. So we have this turbine. We refurbished it, and we kind of put it on steroids so it would run at a lower temperature, lower wind speed. It's kind of a long and convoluted process, and now I'm in my 5th round of battle with a power company because they're still mad because we defeated them on Big Stone 2, which is Autotel Power, but they're required by law, as you know, to sign this power purchase agreement with me. But I've done more gymnastics backflips over this than I would care to say, but I am hoping that I am sure that my tenacity and my stubbornness, so we're back. I got another round this next week, and I think we should be good. But the other thing that we're doing is that we're running it into the building. We put it up ourselves with a bunch of veterans, actually, is who put it up. Because it turns out that if you can blow up a dam project or blow up a power plant or a weapons factory, you probably have an engineering degree from the military. And this is my book on militarization of Indian country, highest rate of living veterans, Native America. And some of those guys, if you got that skill set, turns out this one guy, master's in engineering. I said, can you put this up? He said, yeah. So anyway, having said that, we put it up, and then what we're doing is we're running it into our building, which the power company doesn't want, because what they want you to do is to sell it to the grid and then buy it back. You understand what I'm saying? So this way, if I buy it for 10 cents a kilowatt, it's simple math. I buy it for 10 cents a kilowatt hour from them, they buy it from me for 3.5 cents. So why wouldn't I run it into my building and sell them the surplus, right? Which is why they're fighting me, too. But the reason I'm telling you this is that because I think that all of this is what we need to do at a broader scale. And this was the discussion I had with Al Franken. And also it needs to go to the PUC. The question of it's a question of net metering. And the law in Minnesota, which is punitive. It's a 40-year-old law that says if you are over 40 kilowatts, you have to compete on an unlevel playing field against the utilities. They have no regulation, but I have triple regulation. If I was under 40 kilowatts, I would be fine. But I'm 75 kilowatts. And that is the appropriate size for my building. So if you see what I'm saying is that to change the economics of energy and food, you actually have to do a little battle, right? But in the end, we will have something. So that's my model. That's what we're working on. You can go to our website, the White Earth Land Recovery Project. Just in kind of my conclusion, my theory is, in general, if I can do it, if we can do it, anybody can do it. That's my theory. Because you would not bet on us. But what we know is that no one's going to take care of it for us. We don't have any delusions that there is, a social change ferry, a free energy ferry, a carbon ferry. It's not happening, right? So we look around, we try to take care of it ourselves. The answers are within the simpler solutions. Because right now, federal policy, for instance, is talking about really bad ideas for CO2 emissions, like nuclear power. Reboot. $36 billion, couldn't afford them, haven't built them for 30 years, probably a good reason why, right? And then the other fantastic idea, which is kind of like NSP or Excel waiting for the nuclear waste ferry, is waiting for the carbon ferry, right? And so that is carbon sequestration. The, billions of dollars invested in a really bad idea. The best idea is to keep the carbon in the ground. That's what one slightly more enlightened might do, right? And the reality is you take something like a comparison between industrial agriculture and organic agriculture, and I think you all know this, that organic agriculture could sequester about 25% of CO2 emissions if you went across the board organic, right? So there's your answer. You don't need a ferry to sequester your carbon. You need organic agriculture. And you need to transition from, and each answer is largely held within what we already know, which is part of this mythology of empires that there is a new technological savior, and that is wrong. The second is, extrapolating that, the second is our question, is similarly, efficiencies and renewables are your answer for energy systems. I usually have this really fantastic chart to show you, but what I will tell you is in this diseconomies of scale argument, which I would make. The reality is that between point of origin and point of consumption in the US energy cycle, energy system, linear system, according to Lawrence Livermore Labs, we waste 57% of our energy. Inefficient power production, right? To start with, inefficient power lines, right? Moving everything across, and inefficient distribution and the inefficient use. And the best example, that is the simplest example, which you are all far beyond, is the idea of an incandescent light bulb, which 90% of the energy turns to heat and 10% turns to light, right? So the argument that renewables will not be able to meet present energy demand and needs is a myth. Because what you don't want to do is reboot such an inefficient system. You want to stop leaking. Like, why would we go to all the trouble to do the right thing for basically a giant colander of inefficiencies, right? And so that is part of what needs to happen. And the reality, the situation of localizing and agrobiodiversity changes relationships between people and animals and our foods in us. I think in the end we get better, we become better people. Those smart guys I mentioned at the beginning, Amory Lovins, I was reading him this morning, he talks about things called nega-technologies. Things that it's just a negative economic investment and a set of technological choices. Nuclear power, cluster bombs, carbon sequestration, nega-technologies. Should not be encouraged, should not be subsidized. They're a waste of our resources. And they are being allocated, in that way. Inefficiencies in materials commodities. So they're a fabulous chart I was going to show you. But I'm sure that you don't need a lecture on it, but just generally, I talked about it yesterday, the linear economy. 17% coming from biotic resources, 83% coming from abiotic resources. 93% of the waste is in manufacturing. And then you get the waste in consumption and the fact that about 1% of it is recycled, right? So such an inefficient system means that you need to keep opening up new mines. And perhaps the best examples of that is that reusable glass requires 10% the energy as an aluminum can. Set of choices. Same use, bad choices. Right? So it is not as if there are not answers. There are choices that are made consistently based on an economic system which is fueled by inefficiencies and rewarding those. You get subsidized if you consume more power, right? And there's more profit made, the more consumption. We're not rewarded for efficiencies. The principles of ecological economics in closing. Oh, I almost dropped the principles. Do you remember what I said at the beginning? Very similar. Sustainability, inter- and intra-species distribution of wealth. Discounting and intergenerational justice, and dealing with non-monetized values, imprecision, and uncertainty. Okay, inter- and intra-species distribution of wealth. That's exactly the same concept we have, which is in Indinaway Muganatuk, we are all related. And that we do not have the right to rob another species of their wealth. That all species have a right to wealth. And that within our own, we also do not have this right to rob others of their dignity, right? Discounting and intergenerational justice. It is a common economic principle to discount future value and to say what we spend now is of more value. The uncertainties of the future. That is a mythology. The idea that instead we have to have some kind of intergenerational justice in terms of an economy as well as a social system is an essential practice of sustainability. You cannot rob the future. Yeah? The idea of dealing with non-monetized values, imprecision, and uncertainty. Not all, now how's this great quote thing? All things which can be measured do not count, and all things which count cannot be measured. I always get that kind of wrong. All things which can be measured do not count, and all things which count cannot be measured. That is right. You cannot quantify everything. You cannot put it in an economic box. And we should not. You should not accept mitigation. You should not accept compensation for everything. And finally, dealing with non-monetized values, imprecision, and uncertainty. Again, quality of life is not related to level of consumption. The happiest countries in the world, the US is not considered the happiest country in the world. Highest level of consumption, but turns out we're not the happiest, right? I was at this fabulous economics conference in Aotearoa, or New Zealand. 43 countries attended. I got to hang out with all these economic rock stars. I was like, oh, this is great. And the two countries that were there that really made me, that I aspire, I get to visit one this year. Vanuatu, which I don't know if you've followed, this is a island of the Pacific that won the happiest country award for many years. Did you guys ever see this? Their indicators, their indices, they're Melanesian tribal people. Their indicators are access to land, water, access to traditional food, their language, cultural practices, healthcare, education, prenatal healthcare, their elders, they have no homeless people. You know what I'm saying? Their elders are, so that was their indicators. They're culturally based indicators that were not the same as the indicators of GDP, GNP, full-time employment, right? And they won this, they won the happiest country award for many years, about 8 years. And then they got unseated last year by Costa Rica, who was also there. So I actually did this slide in my presentation, which I would have shown you, which shows White Earth gets Happy Country Award, 2018 or something will be there. But anyway, I said, what happened? I was teasing them. I said, what happened, Vanuatu? What happened to you? They said, faulty data. But Costa Rica, I guess they're pretty happy. They don't even have a darn military. Look at that. So from my perspective is that a durable and post-empire economy is quite possible. And it requires our enlightenment and our practice. Thank you, Miigwech.
The boss lady says I got a couple questions. Yes.
I have a question about wind turbines, because you've been working on this wind turbine, and
Exactly.
I've been, putting a lot of hope in wind and solar energy production, and yet I start to hear these stories about the negative side to wind energy, both in terms of people living across from fields of wind turbines and the noise being really problematic, and also hearing about birds, being killed by the turbines. And I'm just wondering what you've learned about.
First, not all things are perfect. I'm not going to make that. A lot is siting and a lot is technology. Okay. I will tell you that. And then comparatively, bird kills from wind turbines are pretty low compared to, bird kills from mercury contamination in cars. Right? So, that is always held up, but the representation of the data is not accurate. Right? But for instance, the turbine we put up on White Earth, we took a lowland turbine and stuck it on the Nortank Tower, which, everybody, I have to do things this way, but it was because I wanted a tubular tower versus a lattice work tower. Because a lattice work tower is what a bird builds a nest on, right? And they can't build on a tube. And also a tubular tower has 1/5 the lightning strikes. Right?
That's good.
Right, so I made a set of decisions which made everything technologically more difficult for my people. But, I'm trying to build a project replicated. And so I'm willing to, do that, right? The noise, some are louder than others. Depends on where you're sitting, and the reality is that you need to be careful when you cite, and then, some are louder, but some of them are not. Because the one at Morris, which is a 660, I think it's a Vestas. You go stand underneath it and it goes whoosh, 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 whoosh.
I wondered if it had to do with the materials that are
It has to do with the materials and it has to do with the generator. And so ones that are louder should probably not be sited next to houses. But these are the kinds of things, and because the field is nascent, has so little investment, right? And we are so far behind, whether it is Spain or Denmark, right? We don't always make informed decisions. And, certainly the people who are trying to put, the field is not level. And I see that. I also, it's like a comparative thing. I think that there's a lot of people. I have problems with some of their discussion because they would rather not look, they would rather, have some Indian reservation have a coal plants, which is what's going on. You know what I'm saying? And just get the power like that and flip your switch, rather than take responsibility for their own addiction. Which is, you hear me be crabby. It's like, grow up, deal with your, and be responsible. Which is kind of the general problem, is that we just don't want to look at it, not in our backyard, right? And then the gradient, or whatever the spectrum of what is the technology and what is it what you're looking at, Yeah, so, and obviously wind and solar have materials costs, right? They're not carbon free. But the whole argument, for instance, that nuclear is a reduced carbon is ridiculous. It's like a preposterous argument. You know what I'm saying? It's the whole gradient and a set of choices we have to make. The main thing we have to do is reduce our consumption. And that, a lot of you are elderly. And you remember when we lived in a reduced economy, reduced petroleum economy. The economy that my children have grown up on is like, I mean, arguably we haven't consumed as much as a lot because we live in a rural area or wood fire, but well, these kids grow up with assumption, right?
Yeah.
And it's a bubble. There's not a petroleum age, it's a petroleum bubble. And so it's a reality that we need to move past that. I mean, not everything has to be mechanized. You don't need a damn leaf blower.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't need the lecture on the inefficient technologies and choices that we make that have huge implications and should not be encouraged. And so that whole set of discussions they have huge, they have huge implications. Yeah.
It's about the need to buy the land. Who are you buying it from the reservation?
No, non-Indian landowners. The majority of the land on my reservation, as most reservations, called the Allotment Act. And our lands were, our traditional practice of land ownership is individual use collective ownership, or individual use rights called usufruct rights. And so traditionally families would live in non-contiguous parcels, like we live here, maybe and your sugar bush would be here, your rice over here. And in the process of both colonization and trying to turn us into brown-skinned white people or whatever, they said, you're going to live in this square. It had no relationship to anything, but what they did is they allotted the reservations into 80-acre parcels. And then they sold or gave a surplus out in land speculation, often the best lands, right? And then in addition to that, then they taxed the land that we had, and we were non-taxable, it was illegal. Minnesota our reservation is one of the worst cases of land alienation. And that, Indians are non-taxable on our land. And a lot of my people lost their land through taxation and then, a whole set of things. A lot of my relatives, my great-grandparents and my great-uncle ended up in the Fergus Falls Mental Institution because the Indian League didn't people. And then they would sign up. It was that whole collusion of how you lost your land. It's a lot of that. So now we buy it back from non-Indian landowners. But it's a long process, but this case was a school. And then also people donate land to us. Because a lot of people are absentee landowners, holding onto parcels that they had for many years and they never go to them. And so, every couple of years I get either deeded, or our organization gets deeded, or we hold, a new parcel, something, because they know what we're going to do. We're not going to mow it, we're not going to mow down the trees, but it's going to be restored for cultural and ecological reasons. Thank you.
As we come to a close, I've been asked to give Rich and his many hats a little rest, and so I want to just acknowledge what this last day and a half has given us. We have been inspired, we have been informed, we've been challenged to think beyond empire and to think beyond the supermarket. It's been a very rich time, and for that we want to thank our presenters. We want to thank Frank, both for his preaching and for founding the lectureship that brought Winona here. And we want to thank Rich for re-theologizing stewardship, as he does so beautifully, and teaching us how to think and how to rethink what it means to be connected to our world. So thank you, Rich. And I think Robin Rodabaugh and Brenda Langton, who are, I think, not in the room anymore, but taught us some more about various ways that we are connected to how our food is produced and to how we eat. And so we thank them in absentia. And of course to Winona our lecturer and wise woman. All of our speakers have taught us how we are related, how we are connected, how we are interdependent. And our singer also has taught us that in the music. So thanks to Hans. And I can't stop thanking people without thanking the Alum Council, Julie Brown, and Cindy Beth Johnson, always. And the folks you might not see behind the scenes, the folks in the kitchen and the folks who put up the chairs and move the tables and keep us warm and do all those things. So we're grateful to a whole host of folks who make Convocation happen. So if you think you can finish what you're working on, I know I'm paraphrasing, in your lifetime, you're not thinking big enough. So we're ending Convocation, but I hope we are not ending the conversation among us. So thank you all for coming and being part of the conversation. You are here because you're related to United Seminary. I hope that this has helped us all to feel a little more related to our world. And I'm going to ask Hans to close us out with a song.
Vamos, vamos, vamos con Dios. Vamos, vamos, vamos con Dios. We'll sing verses 1 and 3 in Spanish. At least follow along on the vamos part if nothing else on those verses. Lleno del Espíritu Santo, vamos, vamos con Dios, entrando al mundo para servir, vamos, vamos con Dios, vamos, 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 vamos con Dios, vamos, vamos, vamos con, offering a hand to a stranger, offering a hand to a stranger. Go now with God, go now with God, trusting in the risen Savior. Go now with God, go now, go now, go now, go now, go now with God. Go now, go now, go now. Las aguas de piedad nos acogen. Vamos, vamos con Dios, vamos con Dios. La gracia del Señor nos acompaña. Vamos con Dios, vamos, vamos. Crossing every boundary